Listener discretion and content warning. A gentle note before we begin. This episode includes discussion of suicide, as well as direct references to my own lived experience with these themes. The content may feel heavy or triggering, so please listen in a way that feels safe for you. Pause, step away, or return later if you need. If you or someone close to you is struggling, it's important to reach out to someone you trust or a qualified mental health professional. Support from people in your life can make a real difference, and speaking with a trained counsellor or clinician can help you navigate difficult moments with care. You can also contact your local crisis support service or emergency services if you need immediate help. In Australia, support services include Lifeline. You can call them on 13 11 14. Suicide Callback Service on 1300 659 467, and Kids Helpline on 1800 55 1800. If you're listening outside Australia, please reach out to your local crisis support service. We begin this episode by acknowledging the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we record and share these stories. We pay our deepest respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening or watching today's episode. We honour those who walked before us, their enduring connection to country, and the stories held in land, sky, and spirit. May we listen with openness and learn with humility. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to Beyond the Veil Australia podcast, where history, mystery, and the unexplained collide. From eerie encounters to forgotten histories, from channeled messages to scientific perspectives, we explore phenomena that defy easy explanation. I'm Heather, your guide through the shadows and the host of Beyond the Veil Australia podcast. Together, we'll unravel paranormal events, curious connections, and the questions that refuse to stay quiet. So whether you're a skeptic, a seeker, or somewhere in between, this space is for you. Welcome. Last season, we lifted the veil, but this time, we stepped through. So, the passage is open. What waits beyond is now calling your name. Hello and welcome back to Beyond the Veil Australia podcast with me, your host, Heather. Thanks again for joining me in the third and final part of the Shadow Sense, where mental health and the paranormal collide. This is a very fascinating topic for me, so if you haven't already, I highly encourage going back and listening to part 1 and part 2, just to give you a bit more of an idea of where we're at with this one. It's a very, very important topic for me because it's something that has been a thought process of mine for several years, and I've found as I've gone in my personal journey, but also my professional journey as well, it really is a question that I keep coming back to and I keep wanting to know more, hence why we're doing this particular topic. And I find that it is one that I don't think we're necessarily going to get a specific answer, and I think maybe we're not meant to, but in saying that, it is such a big topic that can really go off in so many different directions. So again, this is kind of where my thought process is in this. And if you've got any thoughts, theories, anything about this topic, that whether it's that you're thinking similarly, if there's differences, if you don't think that way at all, anything like that that you want to share, I'd really be open to hearing from you, because I think this is definitely a topic that I don't know if many people have thought about it, but I also wonder if there's many people that are maybe psychically attuned that may have also had these thoughts, or whether you're somebody that just loves the paranormal and it's come to your attention now and you're now starting to think about it and question it with your knowledge on it potentially. If you've got anything that you wanted to share, like please, if you feel comfortable, leave it in the comments, or you can obviously reach out to me on social media and share your thoughts. Really curious to see what other people think about this. I really do appreciate everybody that has engaged in the podcast, whether you're listening or viewing on either an audio platform or on YouTube. For those that have come along in recent months and just found the podcast and started engaging on social media and stuff as well, and the people that have collaborated with me across the journey as well. Of course, it's always a pleasure to be able to actually cross paths with people and be able to work with others in the same area of interest. And it's just it is such a big, vast community, but it is also a very special place for me. I think being in, the paranormal area, because I think it's an area that I've always been extraordinarily fascinated with, and to have taken the leap of faith to give this a go with somebody that had no idea about how to even start a podcast, let alone actually continue one. I'm not as advanced as a lot of other podcasters, but I think I've definitely come a long way in 12 months from someone who knew absolutely nothing about how do I even put this together. The only thing I knew was that I really wanted to be able to have the visual option for people as well. So if people weren't able to listen on an audio platform, if they wanted to watch it on YouTube, that was one thing that I knew I really wanted to do, was to give multiple options for people to be able to listen or watch and enjoy the content. Thank you to everybody that's liked and subscribed and shared the podcast with other people. Thank you very much for your support. It has been a bit of a bumpy ride from time to time, just because life does get in the way sometimes, and this is a passion project of mine. It's not my full-time gig. It's honestly been such a big journey, and it's been better than I've expected, and I'm just very thankful for this experience, because it's opened so many different new avenues and doors for me. And one thing in particular that it has done has really brought me out of my shell a lot, and really encouraged me to just be authentically me and just do what I love doing. And that's discussing the paranormal and really exploring different areas of it. And obviously, having been very lucky to be able to go out and investigate as well from time to time. I am hoping that, at some point again soon, I'm really excited to be able to get back out there and do a little bit more in that area, because it is something that I've always really wanted to do, but always been very reserved about doing it. I'm very thankful for the connections and the friendships that I've built through this podcast platform as well. So yeah, a massive shout out to everybody. And of course, happy first birthday to Beyond the Veil Australia podcast. Season 3 will be something that will probably be done a little bit differently. The episodes might be structured slightly differently. So what I'm thinking and planning is, I've been able to engage with a lot of people through social media that I would really love to have come along onto the podcast and do some co-hosting with me regarding some particular points of interest in topics. So rather than just doing like overviews, kind of like what I have been doing, this will be the last one of all of those like bigger general topic kind of discussions. And then I would like to sort of move into sort of more co-hosting spaces where we can have a few more brains to bounce ideas off and to really pinpoint on specific experiences or cases or things like that, because there's so much from all of these topics that I've learned that I kind of go, I really want to actually explore more in that area specifically. I've also been very lucky to have people have been on my podcast who have also been like, please let me know when you can, because I really want to come back on and I really want to have a chat with you and talk about some different things. So I think next season will probably be a little bit more about pinpointed cases and having co-hosting opportunities with guests that have been on and with new guests, and potentially leave space for some interview styles as well. So it will be a slightly different setup to what we've had so far. And obviously investigation wise, that's probably not going to happen for a while. So I won't have any investigation episodes probably over the next at least 6 months anyway. There is also another project that Sam from Aussie Afterlife and I had been working on since we initially started working together, when we had done the Two Voices episodes where we'd basically interviewed each other but then had a bit of a hijacking spiritually. And we had, not long after recording those, we actually had met up again and recorded several more videos together, sort of nutting out a little bit more in depth around the area that we were tuning into. So that will be something that I think over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, also granted with Sam's schedule as well, that we will try and get back into and piece together so that we can get those episodes out for you as well. They are something that we really wanted to get done, but because we had other investigations happening, we've had to prioritize those first. So I'm hoping that across the next season as well, we'll be able to bring out a little bit more for you regarding that particular experience. I hope that you've enjoyed season 2 so far as well, with all the different topics and the investigation episodes. I really hope that you've also been enjoying this recent 3-parter as well regarding mental health and paranormal experiences, because it is something that I have found really, really fascinating. So without further ado, massive, massive thank you to you all. Here we go for the final episode of the Shadow Sense, and of course the final topical episode for season 2. There are moments when the shadow sense feels like guidance, a soft knowing, a presence, a whisper from something just beyond the edges of the ordinary. And then there are moments when it feels different. Moments where intuition becomes tangled with fear, when presence feels like pressure, and when the unseen feels too close, too loud, and too insistent. Moments when you can't tell if something is happening to you or inside of you. This is the territory where the paranormal and the mental health begin to overlap even more, not just as opposites, not as enemies, but as two languages describing the same storm from different angles. For some people, spiritual sensitivity and psychological vulnerability arrive hand in hand. For others, one masks the other. And for many, the two become so intertwined that it's impossible to separate them cleanly. This episode is not about diagnosing, it's not about debunking, and it's not about proving or disproving the unseen. It's about trying to understand the collision point, the place where the spiritual experience and the mental health symptoms can mirror each other, amplify each other, or even be mistaken for each other. It's about the people who fall through the cracks because their experiences don't fit neatly into one category. It's about the stories that get dismissed as delusion and the delusions that get mistaken for spiritual awakening. It's about the moments when the veil thins, not just between worlds, but between perception and overwhelm. This is the final episode of the trilogy of the Shadow Sense. The most delicate, the most misunderstood, the most human. So, let's step into it gently, but of course, honestly. The two languages of the unseen. When someone has an experience that sits outside the ordinary, a voice, a presence, a vision, a knowing, two dominant frameworks rush in to explain it. The spiritual language and the clinical language. Both are powerful, both are incomplete, but both can save someone and both can harm someone. And both can be true at the same time. This particular area explores how these two languages describe the same experience and how the gap between them can become a place of misunderstanding, fear, or transformation. The spiritual language, meaning, connection, presence. Spiritual frameworks interpret unusual experiences as meaningful, relational, or sacred. They give people a way to understand the unseen without fear or shame. So an example of this is the whisper in grief, A woman loses her grandmother. In the weeks that follows, she hears her name whispered as she falls asleep. Soft and familiar, and a thread that is still connecting them. The presence in the room. A man meditating feels a warm pressure behind him. He interprets this as a guide or an ancestor. The symbolic dream. A teenager dreams of a blackbird on her windowsill. The next day, her life shifts. In her family's tradition, birds are messengers. The sudden knowing. A mother wakes with a feeling her son overseas is unwell. She messages him. He replies from a hospital bed. Spiritual language offers meaning, connection, continuity, identity, comfort, and a sense of being held. But it can also mask distress when the experience becomes overwhelming. The clinical language. Symptoms, stress, and overwhelm. Clinical frameworks interpret unusual experiences through the nervous system, trauma, stress, and cognition. The voice under stress. A student hears her name whispered after 2 nights without sleep. Clinically, hypnagogic, hallucination, stress, exhaustion. The presence during anxiety. A man going through a divorce feels someone standing right behind him. Clinically, this is hypervigilance, trauma activation, and the nervous system scanning for threat. The dream during burnout. A woman working 70-hour weeks has vivid symbolic dreams. Clinically, REM rebound, or REM meaning sleep, emotional processing, and stress discharge. The sudden knowing during panic. A teenager suddenly knows something terrible is coming. Clinically, this is panic onset, adrenaline, catastrophic thinking. Clinical language offers grounding, clarity, safety, stabilisation, and a path towards support. But it can erase the meaning if used without sensitivity. The collision. What both languages mean and how they fail alone. Some experiences sit in the middle, too vivid to dismiss, too destabilising to romanticise. A presence that feels comforting one day and overwhelming the next. A dream that feels symbolic but arrives during sleep deprivation. A voice that feels ancestral but appears during trauma flashback. A knowing that feels intuitive but emerges during burnout. The spiritual lens says, this is a message. The clinical lens says, this is a symptom. But the lived experience says, it's both, and neither, and something in between. This is the collision point, where meaning and distress intertwine, where the unseen and the psychological overlap like 2 shadows cast by the same flame. And why this matters? Because people fall through the cracks here. People who are spiritually sensitive but psychologically overwhelmed. People who are psychologically struggling but spiritually attuned. People dismissed by clinicians, people feared by spiritual communities, people who don't know which language to trust. This episode is for them and everybody that's interested. For those that are the ones who live in the in-between. The overlaps, when spiritual experiences resemble mental health symptoms. There are moments when a spiritual experience looks, sounds, or feels almost identical to a psychological symptom. Not because one is real and the other is fake, but because the human mind and the human spirit often use the same channels to communicate distress, intuition, memory, or meaning. This explores the shared territory, the grey zone, where the shadow sense and mental health symptoms mirror each other so closely that even the person experiencing it can't tell them apart. This isn't about diagnosing, it's just about understanding the overlap. Hearing something, a voice, a whisper, or feeling a presence. Hearing something that isn't physically present can be a spiritual message, a grief response, a trauma echo, hypnagogic hallucination, an intuitive impression, and anxiety symptom. An overlap example, so the name in the dark. A woman hears her name whispered as she falls asleep. Spiritually, this is seen as a visitation, but clinically, it's seen as sleep deprivation, stress, and a transitional brain state. The experience is identical, but the meaning is not. Feeling watched. Feeling watched is one of the most common shadow sense experiences and one of the most common anxiety symptoms. Another example is the presence in the hallway. A man walking through his house at night feels someone behind him. Spiritually, this is seen as a guardian or a presence, and clinically, it's seen as anxiety, trauma, or hypervigilance. The body reacts in the same way in both cases. Vivid dreams. Dreams are one of the most powerful overlap zones. So an example, a woman dreams of a storm tearing through her childhood home. Spiritually, this is a warning or a message, but clinically it can be seen as burnout, emotional overload, unresolved grief. However, the dream feels the same either way. A sudden knowing, so is this intuition or an alarm system? A sudden knowing can be intuition, ancestral memory, psychic sensitivity, or panic, adrenaline, and trauma pattern recognition. So an example of this, a teenager suddenly feels something terrible is coming. Spiritually, this is seen as a premonition, but clinically, this is seen as panic onset and misinterpreted bodily cues. Again, the sensation is identical, but the cause is not. Visual phenomena, symbol or stress response. Seeing something at the edge of the vision can be seen as a spirit, a symbolic image, a shadow figure, pareidolia, disassociation, or even a migraine aura. A person sees a dark shape in the corner of their room. Spiritually, this is seen as a presence, and clinically, this is sleep paralysis, vision distortion, or even stress. But the moment feels the same. Body sensations. A sensation can be energy, presence, and intuition. Or clinically, it can be seen as anxiety, disassociation, or somatic memory. An example of this is a woman feels a warm pressure on her shoulder. Spiritually, this is a comforting presence, but clinically, it's seen as muscle release, stress response, somatic flashback. The warmth is real, and the meaning is layered. And why does this overlap matter? Well, because the overlap is where people get lost. It's where someone experiencing trauma might think they're being haunted, or where someone's experiencing intuition might think that they're losing it. It's where someone spiritually sensitive might be misdiagnosed. It's where someone psychologically struggling might be spiritually exploited. The overlap is not a mistake, it's a shared channel, a place where the mind and the unseen use the same pathways. Understanding the overlap doesn't diminish the spiritual. It doesn't dismiss the psychological. It simply acknowledges that there is truth there. The human experience is layered, and the shadow sense lives in those layers. So, interesting how we're kind of like looking at those things. And I really like that we can kind of look at it and go, the experience is the same. It's just that it can be interpreted as this or as that. And I know I've said this a couple of times throughout multiple episodes and topics, but what if it's both? What if it's neither at the same time? It really then kind of comes back to some of the things that I was talking about in episode 2, which is looking at where things fit in a box. And it's like, well, it's either this or too bad, so sad, right? And I think that really highlighted that the experience can be the same, but it's just about who's interpreting that as what. Is it being interpreted as the spiritual awakening or connectivity or paranormal, or is it being interpreted from a clinical lens of mental health diagnoses? What I found really interesting was right at the end there, where we were actually talking about it can be an overlap where someone who's psychologically struggling might be spiritually exploited, which also I did touch on this in episode 2 as well, where I was sort of looking at it like, well, what if somebody that is, say, for example, schizophrenic? I know I'm using schizophrenic, but it's probably the easiest to kind of talk about in this particular type of context. But what happens if they're actually being influenced or manipulated or taken advantage of by a lower vibrational energy and they're being exploited? Because I touched on this before, but like one of the things that when you're, I suppose, learning to tune into gifts, you learn how to establish your boundaries, you learn how to pick up on different feelings and sensations, and you learn how to switch on and switch off. Whereas somebody that might be diagnosed as schizophrenic, they can't choose when they turn it on or turn it off, which is why I've had that thought process of, okay, but it sort of mirrors if it's a lower vibrational energy that is all about manipulation and harm and oppression and just being very negative, exploiting or taking advantage of someone who's already in a more vulnerable position than someone who's learning how to control what their boundaries are, so to speak. It's that sort of thing there that I really wanted to highlight in what we kind of just talked about, because it is. And the sentence before it was, where someone is spiritually sensitive, but they might be misdiagnosed. And it was, I think I was talking about that where I'd had somebody that I'd worked with that had obviously talked about UAP phenomena. And in that sense, the paranormal spiritual part of me was like, yep, I'm picking up exactly what this person's sharing. I get where they're coming from, blah, 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 blah. But in the context of what this was, they're his experiences, but the psychiatrist is going to look at it in a totally different way and be looking at it from the diagnosis point of view. So there's the difference there where they overlap and they're slightly disconnected, but they can also be the same thing. And it's just that perception of it. So it is really interesting that we got to kind of like revisit some of those things that I probably jumped the gun with, but they kind of worked really well in those episodes as well of being able to kind of explore that a bit more. So again, that could also have been me unintentionally laying the groundwork for this episode. Probably. I'm just going to go with that and say I totally planned that, even though I really didn't, because it's worked. It's worked really well, actually. It's interesting. Just sort of what we've looked at there is some of the stuff we've spent some time on is sort of we're able to kind of look at that just a little bit differently with a little bit more context to it. The unsteady middle when experience outruns language. There's a point in certain experiences, the strange ones, the heavy ones, the ones you don't talk about easily, where language stops keeping up, where what you're feeling doesn't fit the words that you've been given. This is about that place, that unsteady middle, when the experience doesn't match the story that you're telling about it. Sometimes the story you reach for doesn't actually land. It feels close, but not quite right. You know something is happening. You just don't know what shape it is yet. And this isn't failure. It's the beginning of understanding. When the experience feels real in the body, but unreal in the mind. A shift in the air, a sudden stillness, a tightening in the chest. Your body says something's here, but your mind says, what? This, again, is the collision point. When the experience feels true, but not literal. Some experiences feel true in a way that has nothing to do with facts. Not hallucination, not visitation, something else. It's a meaning trying to take form. When the experience belongs to two worlds at once. A dream that feels like grief and intuition. a presence that feels like memory and atmosphere, not contradictions. They're layers. When you can't tell if you're remembering or sensing, memory rises like a tide. Intuition, it echoes like a whisper. And sometimes they sound the same. When the experience happens to you and through you, you're not just observing it, you're inside it. Your senses, your history, your environment, all a part of that moment. And when you stop trying to explain it and start trying to live with it, the question shifts from what is this to how do I move through this without losing myself? This is the human condition when the experience exceeds the language. This is the territory, not the spiritual, not the clinical, the in-between, where the paranormal and mental health collide not as opposites, but as overlapping ways of experiencing the world. The grey zone, when you truly can't tell what's happening. There's a space where the world feels slightly misaligned, like a picture frame nudged just enough to notice. This is the grey zone, when the experience feels both real and impossible. You're left holding two truths. I felt this, but this shouldn't be possible. And again, both are true. When the experience has weight but no source, a density in the room, a pressure with no origin, and sensation outruns explanation. A familiarity you can't place, a recognition without context, time folds a little. And when the experience feels like you and not you at the same time, a thought doesn't sound like your voice, and a feeling doesn't match your mood, identity becomes porous. And sometimes you can't tell if you're picking something up or projecting. Sometimes it's the world, and sometimes it's you, and sometimes it's both. Perception becomes a two-way mirror. When you stop trying to figure it out and start trying to stay orientated, the goal becomes grounding, staying connected to yourself. Uncertainty is not danger, it's just human. When you realize the experience doesn't always need to have a name. Some experiences want to be witnessed, not categorized. Unresolved, unlabeled, and unfinished. The grey zone is not a problem, it's a place where perception is layered, meaning is fluid, identity is shifting, and certainty dissolves. Interesting. I think in both episodes we did touch a little bit on the grey zone and just different elements of it coming from sort of slightly different perspectives. But what I really liked about this sort of area is that it's like sometimes the experience doesn't need to be labeled or categorized or anything. Sometimes it's just the experience and it just needs to be acknowledged. It doesn't need to be researched and answered and everything. And, if you listen to the post-investigation episode, I had talked about Sam and I had a really, really confronting experience each within that sort of first week or so post-investigation. And neither of us knew that the other had experienced this. It was just a pure fluke that we happened to experience it pretty much at the same time. And it was that I just need to talk to someone kind of thing. And we were able to share it. And in that moment, it was like, holy fuck, this happened to me and this happened to you and blah, 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 blah. And it was a very deeply personal experience. And I did mention in that episode is whether we talk about that particular experience or not publicly, who knows? But sometimes the experience doesn't always need to be shared so in depth for everyone. Sometimes it just needs to be experienced and acknowledged by the people that experienced it. I think it's very similar with this particular section as well, is that grey zone is sometimes it can be a very profound experience, and yeah, absolutely, it needs to be shared, or it needs to be processed or labeled or categorized, or there is that part of us that as human beings we want to debunk, we want to find out, we want reasoning for things, and so there are particular experiences where that is somewhat doable, where you can start to piece a bit of a story and a bit of an explanation for it. But then there are other experiences that sometimes don't need to be shared, or don't need to be debunked, and don't need to be heavily researched and explored. Sometimes they can just be left at, this was an experience. And I do believe that to be true. There are plenty of times, and this is, again, it's another example with the investigation episodes, and why they take so long is because so much happens, but you're also trying to look through everything that you've experienced and go, is this something that needs to be shared? Is it something that I just need to acknowledge and know that that's happened for me, and that's part of my experience? Is it something that needs to be explored further, or is it something that can just be left as the experience? And I think in that respect, yes, that again is another reason why it takes so fucking long to put those episodes together, because you have so much stuff that you've got to go, cool, all right, well, what am I actually sharing? What am I keeping to myself? How does this tie in with, particularly with a collaboration like that, how does this tie in with other people's episodes and evidence that have come through as well, that can be supportive of each other's stuff without crossing boundaries or anything like that? But even in the mental health perspective, I've been fairly forthcoming with saying I've had my own mental health challenges throughout my life. And I think now, upon reflection, with being able to identify with being neurodiverse, one thing that I have learned is that through the years of not knowing that you're neurodiverse, but the years of masking that you also didn't know were masking because you thought it was a societal expectation, comes trauma. And so when there's that trauma there, when you get a bit more information on how your brain works and how you do things and all of that sort of stuff, it then, yes, it provides some relief, but it also can be, I guess, re-traumatizing in that sense, because you're starting to evaluate your whole life. You're starting to go, oh my God. And you're then starting to go through these grief periods of like, oh, I just thought that was this, and oh God, no wonder that felt the way that did. And those, all of those things that come up for you, that you start to think, wow, that's a lot. And it does. It can, and it has for me several times. It has sent me into spirals where I do go into a really, 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 really not very nice place. And I've been in that, oh, not that I'd like to admit this that often, but I've been in a very, very dark place many times in my adulthood, and particularly through my parenthood and marriage part of my life. That's probably where I've had the most darkest moments. And I've learned so much from those moments that I feel that I have, I guess, what we would probably call like a toolbox of, I've been here before. I'm sitting in these emotions, and I'm going to let myself feel these emotions because they need to be experienced and felt, rather than doing what I would always do as the default method because of society expectations, because of fear of judgment, because of all of that stuff that you're like, that's all the outside can see, and this is all the inside can see. And keeping it very disassociated. But the more I've experienced those things, the more I've learned to sit with them and let them be and feel them and experience them, the better I've actually come out of them. And for me, I've also had that spiritual awakening throughout that as well. So for me, I've always had connectivity to spirit through most of my life. But again, it's in that same phase where I had the majority of my darker times, which was into my parenthood journey and my marriage journey in life. They were the darkest. They've held some of the very darkest deepest, most horrendous moments of my life. But that's also where I did so much spiritual growth as well. That's where I learnt properly that love for the paranormal that I had all my life, I could explore it in a different way, and I could really delve into it more. And the more I learnt about that, the more I learnt about my mental health. And yes, there's still stuff that I've learned even in recent weeks about myself that I'm like, oh, the pennies dropped, you know? So it is really interesting, like looking at these parts of mental health where one thing I have noticed is that I have seen, particularly over the last 12 months anyway, like when we've had energy spikes and electromagnetic spikes and things like that, and how some people really feel that, and they can feel themselves not feeling like themselves. Like, and it's usually been, oh, we've had a big energy spike on whatever date at whatever time, blah, blah, blah. Have you been feeling X, Y, Z? And it's like, oh my God, yes, I have. Is that what that is? Because there was no rhyme or reason to feel it. It was just like, well, what is this? Is this, has something, in life just triggered me and made me feel like shit? Or is there something else that's like paranormal and spiritual that's also going on at the same time that is actually what's happening, but it's presenting as something in mental health? I'm curious. I'm going to put that out there for people to think about and to question or to share experience if you wanted to. During all of that period of spiritual growth and darkness, I found this part of my life very interesting in that sense, because I've just learned so much about myself. I've learned so much about my um I don't know if, again, calling. I don't know if calling the right word. It sounds really wanky, but like that, I feel like I'm meant to be doing like the podcast. I feel like I'm meant to be in the professional role that I'm in. They just feel like the right fit for me. And I've never had that with any other professional role or even hobbies. Like, I've had hobbies that I've loved and really enjoyed, but I felt, now when I reflect, I kind of look at it and go, all right, well, that was only meant to be there for that period of time, because that's what I needed for me at that time. Whereas now it's a very different feeling with different things that I'm doing now, where it's like, this feels more than just this is what you need at the moment. It feels like this is what you were meant to do. And so I think for me, with looking at topics like this, where it is crossover between the mental health and the paranormal, I think I touched on this in the tools of the trade. It's quite strange when you're sitting in that place of being like, well, with my experience of paranormal and spirituality and psychic abilities and all those belief systems, I can absolutely see all of this. And then on the other hand, you've got all of the professional side of you that looks at all of the other research from a different lens and goes, but I can see all of that too. And what happens if they're not even remotely related? Or what happens if they are so deeply related, but it's just, we've got to find an explanation for things, rather than just sitting in that experience and just knowing that sometimes things don't always need a label. They don't always need to be categorized. Sometimes they're just experiences. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to hear what other people think, and what their experiences may or may not have been as well. It is something that I think is just an ever changing and ever evolving thing, and I guess potentially with what's sort of happening globally at the moment with looking at UAP disclosure. Is it possible that the more we explore that, the more we'll start having understanding for things like this? Or is it completely unrelated? I don't think it's unrelated. I think everything is very intertwined and very interconnected, more than we realize. So I think it's just that maybe we're not at a place where we're able to comprehend it in the way it needs to be comprehended. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's even quite the right phrase. All right. Integration, living with the collision point. There comes a moment when the experience stops trying to sort itself out for you. It's not going to choose a category. It's not going to declare a side. It's just going to sit there in that space in between. And you're left with the quiet work of living with it. Accepting that not everything has a name. Some experiences are mosaics, part memory, part emotion, part perception, and part atmosphere. Integration begins with allowing for the complexity, letting the experience be what it was without deciding what it meant. This happened. I don't know what it was, and that's okay. It's not dismissing it, and it's not elevating it. It's just acknowledging it. Letting yourself be changed by it, but not defined by it. A shift, a subtle reorientation. Not an identity, just a mark. Holding multiple truths without choosing just one. Something psychological happened. Something perceptual happened. Something emotional happened. Something symbolic happened. Something unnamed happened. And it can all coexist. A chapter that is not a definition. Finding your own way to hold it, you can do this by writing it down, speaking about it, keeping it private, turning it into art, and also just letting it drift away. There's no correct method. Understanding that uncertainty is not a failure. Some experiences are not meant to be resolved, they're meant to be lived with. Uncertainty is a state of being. The collision point becomes part of you, quietly, not as a mystery, not as a warning, and not as a revelation. Something just happened. Something that shaped you, something that expanded your understanding of being human, and integration is the soft landing after the storm. So, again, I like that we've kind of touched on that a lot today, is that things don't need to be categorized, and that sometimes things just need to be, you need to be in that space and you need to just sit with it and acknowledge it. I also understand too, like there is sometimes far more complexity to that, that it can't just be left to sit with an experience and whatever. There is a lot more there, but to kind of keep it simple about the collision point, I definitely think that we've covered that a little bit today, is kind of looking at differences that the experience can be the same regardless. It's just the perception can be slightly different. And, you know, with what I was kind of sharing about, you know, my experiences with mental health and my spiritual journey and how they were in that same period primarily. And there's so much there that, you know, you can't say, oh, it's a coincidence, because I don't think there is such thing as a coincidence. I think it's there for a reason. When I was studying, one thing I remember, and I'll never ever forget this. So we were in this particular unit was like a trauma-informed care unit. And one thing that was said by this educator was you need to be able to sit with it and learn to get comfortable in the discomfort. And I really love that saying. It's something that I always carry with me for my own stuff. Now that I can reflect on it, sitting in the dark place is fucking horrible. It is. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Being in that dark place is fucking horrendous. But learning how to sit in that and take in the discomfort then leads to the growth. And there was a photo that I had found, oh God, it was a while ago. And it's basically a half and half, like long ways half and half. And one side has their face like a Black Panther type face, and then the other half is like a white one. And it says basically in there that darkness teaches us power and strength and humility, and the light teaches us love and compassion. So basically, it's kind of saying that, yes, we want to keep things light and we want to feel good and we want to be happy and all of that sort of stuff. But to be able to truly enjoy that sometimes for some people, you really have to be in that dark place to properly understand and appreciate what the light feels like. And so I've seen it on Temu actually, and it's a hoodie that I'd really love to get. And it actually says, hello, darkness, my old friend. And I love it because it's for me, there's significance in it for me because I've sat in the darkness more times than I've sat in the light. And I'm not afraid of that darkness. It doesn't mean I don't want to be in it. No one fucking raises their hand to be in the darkness, but because I've sat in that darkness so many times and I've learned so much more each time I've sat there, the more I've been able to really truly appreciate those light moments and really take on what comes out of the light, right? And there are people in my life that have sat in that darkness and they've never come out, unfortunately. And one thing I will say is there was somebody that in my life that had sat in the darkness and decided that they didn't want to come out of it because they'd had enough. And that's okay. But what was really hard was being around all the people and the loved ones that don't understand it and are very hurt and angry and don't really know how to process it. Because I'd sat in that place so many times myself, I could feel a stronger connection to this person because I knew I've been in that place and I know exactly why they've chosen what they've chosen because I've been on that bloody teeter point trying to make that decision myself before. So to be able to feel connected to that person after they'd gone on a level of, I don't like that that's the choice, but I also empathize and I understand why. And I can feel that for you. And I'm sorry that you felt that, but it's hurting people. And then for the people that are left over to be able to validate their feelings, but also try and give a bit more of a generalized explanation about what it's actually like being in that place and why certain decisions feel like the only one. And for some people, they've had to make that decision. I'm actually going to say this right now. So people that make that decision, that's not the first time they've made that decision. They've had that decision bouncing around their brains for a very long time. This is the first time that they actually went, you know what, I'm allowed to choose this if I want. And they do. And so try and be able to, not necessarily, it's not to bring closure or healing, but it's just to help people just have a little bit of understanding so that they can move through their grief a little bit better. And I'm not saying that there's a rule book on grief, but just so that they're not carrying the heaviness all the time, is to be able to kind of give a perspective of this is generally the thought process. This is generally the emotional pain. Doesn't mean that it's right for the people that are left behind, but it was right for them because they've had that choice many times and now they've chosen it. And for some people, you can see that they go, I get it, but I'm still angry. And yeah, you're allowed to be. You are absolutely allowed to be. You're allowed to be angry. But don't think that that's something that the person hasn't thought of themselves, because by the time they've made that choice, their perception is completely different to what yours is. Anyway, that's probably enough of rambling on about that. But yeah, it's I've really learned that sometimes sitting in that darkness is nothing to, like, it's not, you don't need to fear it as much as you think. Sometimes it's just about learning how to sit in that darkness and get comfortable with the discomfort, because that's when the true growth happens. And then when you are able to get out of that darkness, you can appreciate so much more and you grow. And spiritually, for me anyway, that was where I noticed I had my biggest developmental leaps, if you will, was the multiple fucking experiences in that dark place was what helped me really grow. And without those, I wouldn't be doing the podcast. Um, so for me, it can be a really good teacher of that. Um, and this is where I find, that crossover with the mental health and the paranormal stuff is it's so tricky. Not only are we just looking at like like diagnosis categories and then spiritual, like we're not just separating it that way. It's about kind of seeing how they can intersect and acknowledging that both can exist at the same time. Kind of as I've shared with some of my stories there, which probably are a little bit deep and personal for everybody. So, yeah, my bad. But yeah, it's a really it is a really interesting topic, and I think because for me it's a very personal kind of thing where I've been able to experience things that I guess those questions start to pop up more. And then, not only have you experienced it in your own personal way, but in your profession or just in general life, you're starting to see some of these similarities, sort of like what we touched on episode 1 and 2, where it's sort of like, but what if that's actually not what's going on? What if it's actually this? And why is it being categorized as that? And, this is what I liked about this one, is that it's kind of taught us that can also be pretty much the same thing, and that they can mirror so well. And the experience can be exactly the same, but the perceptions can be completely different. So again, there's a bit of food for thought. I hope I haven't traumatized anybody too much. I tried to keep things as generalized as I could so that I didn't traumatize people, or myself again for that matter. But anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this. But across this trilogy, we've actually explored the unseen from a few different angles, and the stories that we inherit, the experiences that we live with, and the moments that refuse to sit neatly in either world. And now at the end, one thing becomes even clearer, is that the line between mental health and the paranormal isn't really a line at all. It's a shifting boundary that's shaped by culture, memory, language, and the frameworks that we've been taught to trust. Most of us were raised to believe these realms are opposites. One is real and one is imagined. One is valid and one is suspect. And of course, one explainable, one irrational. But when you listen closely to people's experiences, these categories begin to blur. Not because everything is paranormal, not because everything is psychological, but because human perception is more complex than the boxes that we try to put it in. If these episodes leave you with anything, let it be the question of how you decide what counts as real, and who taught you to decide that way. How much of what we call mental health is actually shaped by culture, and how much of what we call paranormal is shaped by expectation, and what happens to the experiences that don't fit either story. The collision point isn't just a mystery to solve, it's a mirror showing us the limits of our language, the assumptions that we've inherited, and the ways that we try to force meaning onto things that don't want to be simplified. So as we close this 3-part episode, nothing is actually resolved, but something is still opened. A space to question, a space to reconsider, and a space to notice that the moments where your interpretations might be narrower than the experience itself. Because the real story isn't about choosing between mental health and the paranormal. It's about recognizing how quickly we reach for certainty in places that were never meant to be certain. And maybe that's the point, not to decide what these experiences are, but to notice how you've been taught to think about them. And that's where I'll leave it. Not with answers, but with a shift in perspective. Once again, thank you all for joining me with Beyond the Veil Australia podcast. I really appreciate everybody's love and support, and I really appreciate everybody that does engage with the podcast, whether that's just listening or watching or engaging through social media. I really do appreciate your presence, and thank you so much for continually supporting this and keeping it here a year on, because it's truly amazing to be sort of sitting in this place a year on with so much love and gratitude. It's just undescribable, really. If you've liked today's episodes or the last 3 episodes, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and if you can, share the podcast with somebody who you think might like it, because it helps our podcast get moved out to other paranormal enthusiasts just like you and I. So, on that note, thank you all so much. Remember to stay grounded, stay curious, and always expect the unexpected. I will talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for a wonderful season 2 and for supporting the podcast. Bye for now. Before we finish, I want to acknowledge that some of the themes in this episode may have brought up strong or unexpected feelings. If anything you've heard today has affected you, please reach out to someone you trust or a qualified mental health professional. You don't have to move through difficult moments on your own, and support is available. In Australia, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14, the Suicide Callback Service on 1300 659 467, or Kids Helpline on 1800 55 1800. If you're listening outside of Australia, please reach out to your local crisis support service or emergency services if you need immediate help.